I might be optimistic. Good morning, good morning, good morning. This is the Commissioner's Weekly Meeting for February 12th, 2025. I'm Eric Blank. Commissioner Gilman, you ready to approve the consent agenda as presented, or any preliminary comments?
Good morning. I would vote to approve the consent agenda.
Commissioner Plant?
Good morning. I would vote to approve the consent agenda as well.
As would I, and we will start with Director White, the gas pipeline safety audit.
Thank you, Commissioners. I think this is on. Nice to see you all in person today. I'm actually going to have Casey Hensley, who is the section manager for the pipeline program, give you an update today on our deliverance of the audit recommendations that was conducted in 2022-2023, as well as an update on sort of next steps in terms of pipelines overall.
Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to share with you the pipeline safety program's progress in implementing the 2023 performance audit recommendations and steps forward to implement advanced leak detection initiatives as outlined in SB 21108 and the decision R230744 from proceeding number 22R0491 GPS. Can y'all hear me okay?
We can.
Okay. As discussed in the Legislative Audit Committee hearing on December 9th, 2024, the audit resulted in 39 recommendations across 12 categories. As of October of this year, DORA and the PUC had fully implemented 36 recommendations and partially implemented 3. As of today, the 3 outstanding partially implemented recommendations have been completed. Today, this update is focused on the nature and significance of the change to the PUC's pipeline safety program that the audit initiated. This audit made important and lasting changes to the PUC's pipeline safety program. First, as a result of the audit, the PUC completely overhauled its internal program guidelines. These guidelines prescribe every aspect of the pipeline safety program's work, including how inspections are conducted and documented, how penalties are calculated, how oversight and quality control are ensured, and how we determine inspector staffing levels. For example, prior to this audit, inspection intervals were generally on a 5-year schedule. Now the program utilizes a risk assessment procedure to prioritize operator inspections based on predefined metrics, which has resulted in shorter inspection intervals or has justified the maximum inspection intervals as appropriate. Another example relates to compliance actions. Prior to the audit, all compliance actions were handled by the program chief. Now compliance actions follow a procedure that includes inspection team quality control, as well as quarterly review by the PUC Deputy of Public Safety. In the case of a legal proceeding, such as a notice of probable violation, the Commission Litigation Counsel at the Office of the Attorney General reviews as well. The application of each step of the compliance process is consistent and objective according to both PUC regulation and program guidelines. Lastly, a new quarterly process provides oversight by both PUC and DORA leadership. The second major area of improvement is the development of a new data management system known as OnBase, which tracks and documents all inspections and investigations, compliance actions, and complaints from stakeholders. This system is an OIT-supported application that serves as a central location to track inspection person days, investigation status, and compliance action status. Prior to the audit and building OnBase, our record retention and tracking system relied on the Federal Inspection Assistant which doesn't have the capability to track inspection metrics such as inspection time and compliance actions. Instead, PSP utilized the software that was not supported by OIT. Improving the maintenance of our compliance records helps develop a pattern of operator behavior. The last area I'll touch on is on inspector training. The pipeline safety program currently has 10 inspectors on board. 8 of these have been certified as lead inspectors. This means that they've completed at least 6 classes and approximately 336 hours of training per inspector at the Pipeline Hazardous Materials and Safety Administration Training Center in Oklahoma. The 2 inspectors that haven't been certified as lead inspectors yet are new to the program and still working their way through the courses. 5 of our current inspectors have also received specialized training in welding, cathodic protection, and integrity management program auditing. 2 inspectors are working towards integrity management program and liquid natural gas auditing certifications. In addition to the effort and investment to reach these training levels, the audit also brought about a detailed tracking system so that program leadership knows exactly what training each inspector has received and who is qualified to serve as the lead inspector. Lastly, I'd like to update you on our 3 partial recommendations. Recommendation 1A asks the PUC to implement program practices and tools to document complete information on inspections and retain the inspection data and documents in compliance with federal requirements. This recommendation was initially listed as partially complete because when the auditor's status report was completed, we were waiting on a signature from the Office of State Archives and Public Records on a form documenting the Public Safety Program's record retention practices. That form has now been signed, and this recommendation is fully implemented. Recommendation 1E is to develop and implement written program procedures to assess risk at least annually based on required factors and incorporate the risk assessment into the scheduling plan to help ensure that operators are assessed as high risk are inspected more frequently. While we have developed written procedures to assess risk, full implementation of this recommendation required completion of the risk assessment itself, which required collecting a full year of data per our new protocols. On December 12th, the Pipeline Safety Program conducted the first year-end assessment, which marked this recommendation as fully implemented. The final partial implementation item is under 10D, implementing program processes to periodically review complaint data to identify operator or other safety trends that may need to be addressed and taking action as needed. Similar to 1E, we were waiting on a full year of complaint data to complete this review. The December 12th meeting was held and the PSP reviewed complaint data along with the incident, event, and investigation data. This year-end assessment made the recommendation fully implemented. I'd like to close my remarks by acknowledging the rigor of this audit and its importance to our pipeline program. Our program is better organized, better trained, and better positioned to ensure safety of our pipeline network across Colorado. I'd also like to note that the Commission is continuing to address SB 21108 through rulemaking. The Commission completed rulemaking last year in proceeding numbers 22R and 0491 GPS and 24R 0078 GPS, making important updates between those 2 proceedings to ongoing leak reporting terminology and doubling the Commission's finding authority thresholds consistent with SB 21108 and HB 231216 and updated federal regulations. While these rulemakings made significant updates, federal leak detection rulemaking before PHMSA was still ongoing throughout 2024, and the Commissioners agreed with the assigned ALJ's recommendation that a subsequent rulemaking should come forward upon completion of the then ongoing federal rulemaking updates regarding advanced leak detection technology. With the recent change in federal administration, it's not clear at this time how these federal rules will move forward or be implemented. Nevertheless, and to ensure the continued protections and public safety initiatives in Colorado, PSP intends to continue discussions with stakeholders to further improve the Commission's rules. The PSP team plans to conduct stakeholder outreach through next month, including to make further rule proposals. PSP will aim to bring back recommendations for Commissioner consideration, including a potential NOPR and other continued formal and informal stakeholder efforts that address, but are not limited to, updates on advanced leak detection and leak repair requirements. Following stakeholder input, we plan to bring back specific recommendations at a future weekly meeting to aid in the Commission's ongoing efforts to continuously ensure improvements to pipeline safety. Thank you.
Sounds like lots of progress. Director White, anything you want to add or?
Thank you. I'm really proud of this team and the work they've done to implement the audit. It was 39 recommendations is a lot. It required quite a bit of overhaul to our systems, and I think all in all, a good set of improvements. This is we have much stronger record-keeping systems in place, which will help the program overall. And I'm looking forward to moving into the rulemaking space to fully implement Senate Bill 108 next.
Thanks, Commissioner Gilman. Questions, comments?
No questions really, Ms. Hensley, but wanted to say thank you very much to you and your team. And I know in part a response to the audit, but also I appreciate your dedication to pipeline safety and to running the program as efficiently and fully as possible. And to Director White for her support of you in responding to the audit and making all of the progress that you've made in a really short time. And I certainly hope that your team continues to get good guidance out of PHMSA and the funding that you need to be able to carry on this important work to promote public safety, especially in the pipeline space.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, just echo that. Congratulations to the whole team. I think that, one of the things, people hear the word audit and you think IRS or something, it's everybody just, cowers, but it's really, it's an opportunity.
It wasn't so different.
But it's an opportunity to identify, areas where we can improve. And you guys really, I think, took that on head on and addressed all the issues that were included there, and that's really to be commended, as well as your outreach and your transparency moving forward. I think it's a really great improvement to the system, and so just wanted to share my congratulations.
Thanks to you both. Greatly appreciated. I think we're going to do nothing in the order of this agenda, and we're going to jump to Ms. Crandall, sunset review process.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm standing in for Director White here briefly to introduce Saul Larson, who's with the Colorado Office of Policy Research and Regulatory Reform. He'll be giving you a brief update on the process for the Commission's sunset review, which is kicking off here. And this isn't a decision item, just an update, and happy to stay here and answer questions as needed.
Welcome.
Thank you, Kelly. Again, my name is Saul Larson. I'm with the Colorado Office of Policy Research and Regulatory Reform within DORA. Our office is located in the Executive Director's office within DORA. And I just wanted to introduce myself to you all and let you know that the PU statute is currently under sunset review. And what triggers a sunset review is something called a repealer, and it's contained in many practice acts or statutes. And that repealer says something to the effect that this article is scheduled to repeal effective September 1st, 2026, unless continued by the General Assembly. That's what triggers a sunset review. We do utilize statutory criteria when we evaluate every program. The first criterion is regulation necessary to protect the public? That's the most important criterion that we follow during every sunset review. The third sunset criterion is also very important as well, and that's the least restrictive form of regulation consistent with public protection. Really, there are three phases to the sunset review process. The first phase is the research phase, and then there's the writing phase, and then there's finally the legislative phase. The research phase research is a very broad term, as we all know, and that entails anything from stakeholder outreach. That's one of our big tenets of our sunset review process, is we reach out to as many different stakeholders as we can, commissioners included in that stakeholder process as well. And that process, we try to identify as many issues as we can, updates to the statute, et cetera. And that process, our first phase, typically goes until about June. After June, we move into the writing portion of our process, and I don't know if you've ever seen a sunset report, but it contains 4 different sections. And the first section of a sunset report is the profile of the profession or profile of the industry. And what we'll do is give the reader an idea of what different industries that we're working on, give them a cursory review of what they do and what they are. The second section of our reports is the legal framework section, and that's basically a cursory review of the statute as well as the applicable rules. The third section is the program description section, where we actually describe the program, how many disciplinary actions, for example, were imposed. And typically, we use a snapshot of 5 fiscal years. That gives us a pretty good time frame in terms of what's going on with the program or the statute. The last section of our report is the recommendation sections, and that's the most important part of our reports. We are authorized to recommend continuation of a program for up to 15 years. However, we do like to stay in the time frame between 7 and 11 years, depending on any issues or how major the issues that we identify. We do oftentimes have other issues that flow or other recommendations that flow from the initial continuation or sunset recommendation. There are 2 types of recommendations that we utilize. The first is the regular statutory recommendations, which are obviously changes to the statute. And we do at times utilize administrative recommendations as well. And one example, a simplistic example of an administrative recommendation is that if we're doing a sunset review and we realize that, for example, the PUC does not post their current rules and or statute on the website, that would be an administrative recommendation. Something that we identified during the course of our research that doesn't rise up to the level of a statutory change. However, we recognize that that should be implemented for the PUC, and I'm not suggesting that's happening in this case whatsoever. But I'm just saying that's just an example of an administrative recommendation. We do publish our reports on October 15th, and when our reports are published, they're available to the General Assembly as well as to the public. After we do publish our reports, our staff will work with the folks at Legislative Legal Services to draft a draft sunset bill. That draft sunset bill is required to exactly reflect the recommendation or recommendations in the report. Typically, there's a little back and forth between our staff as well as the Legislative Legal Counsel staff in terms of getting the language and the intent of our recommendations correct. Once we get that all ironed out or hashed out, then we will go to the legislature next legislative session. I believe we start in the House next legislative session, 2026. I'll provide an overview to the committee of reference of the sunset review process, and I will also highlight the recommendation or recommendations in the report. And once again, those recommendations have to be included and exactly reflect the recommendations in the draft bill. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I did want to note before I answer any questions that we are doing this as a team project. Myself, I'm the lead on the project. Again, my name is Saul Larson. And Brian Tobias, our director, he's working on the energy portion of the report. Saab Singh is doing the administrative portion of our report. Jennifer Lockwood is doing the transportation section. And Vivian Belmont is doing the water and telecommunications section. So it is important to note that we do reach out to as many stakeholders as we can. However, we don't know who all the stakeholders are, so they are free to contact our office or myself if they would like to provide input on the report. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, I don't have any questions, but I want to express my appreciation for you and your team helping us through this process. So thank you. Commissioner Gelman, questions, comments?
No, same. Thank you for the introduction. Very much appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll be seeing and hearing a lot of you in the months to come, and
Definitely.
look forward to working with you through the process.
Definitely.
Commissioner Plant?
Thank you. Yes, same. I just had one quick question. Is there if the public has any ideas or contributions to make to the process in terms of, the sunset process and ideas that they would like to have considered, is there a mechanism for them to do that?
Yes, absolutely. So there is a link on the PUC website that has a little blurb of our office, and there's a link where you can provide your input electronically, or you can reach out to me, and I can certainly to address those issues. And my email address is Saul. It's saul.larsen, LARSEN, @state.co.us.
Ms. Crandall, do we have an open docket to hold comments, or should we, or?
No, I don't think there's a necessity for any kind of procedural action from the commission here, since Copper will be leading the process. Thank you.
Well, thanks again.
Well, thank you.
Look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Look forward to working with you all.
Proceeding number 24A-0569R, Mr. Farrell, Union Pacific Railroad. We can. I thought you already gave it, but Commissioner Gilman?
I agree.
Commissioner Plant? I also agree. As do I, and that can be an ABC order finding the application incomplete. I thought you were just testing me. So we're going to skip the Black Hills rate case and come to that last, and we'll go to 24A-0561G, quality of service plans for Black Hills, Colorado Gas. Mr. Davis, Ms. Friedman.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Ron Davis of the Commission's advisory staff. On December 20th, Black Hills, Colorado Gas and its affiliate, Rocky Mountain Natural Gas, filed an application jointly for approval of their quality of service plans, or QSPs. QSPs were initially intended to protect customers by ensuring that no degradation of service would result from the acquisition by Black Hills of certain gas utility operations in the state. The QSPs set forth a collection of service metrics, annual goals, and negative financial incentives, and they foster the annual monitoring and reporting of these metrics. They were first contemplated in a 2019 proceeding, and they were intended to track whether the company is maintaining quality in its provision of service post the transaction. In this case, Black Hills proposes to continue the two QSPs with certain modifications. Black Hills explains that it met with staff and the Colorado Office of the Utility Consumer Advocate to discuss some options for proposed new metrics, and the proposed QSPs are proposed to be in effect from January 1st of this year through December 31st of 2029. The proposed QSP metrics for Black Hills Colorado Gas are in three categories: safety, reliability, and adequate service. In brief, they include a damage prevention metric, emergency response time, grade 2 leak repair times, a survey-based measure of adequate service, and an on-time rate for non-emergency calls. The proposed QSP measures for Rocky Mountain are damage prevention, greenhouse gas emission reductions, and outage frequency. Both staff and the UCA filed a notice of intervention of right, and they request a hearing in this matter. Staff seeks to address whether the joint application is appropriate for the two QSPs and whether the company had attained sufficient and appropriate stakeholder input, whether the proposed metrics, goals, and disincentives sufficiently incorporate equitable access to disproportionately impacted communities, and whether the filing complies with past Commission decisions and the requirements of PHMSA. UCA similarly seeks to examine whether the negative financial incentives should be updated to reflect interim inflation that has occurred since some of the metrics were first established, whether the QSP metric categories continue to be relevant or need to be adjusted further, whether the metrics are complete or whether there should be additional ones. The decision for you now is whether to set the matter for hearing, and if it is, whether to send the case to an administrative law judge.
Do you have a recommendation for us?
Yes. I recommend that the Commission refer the matter for hearing before an ALJ by minute entry.
Commissioner Gilman.
I agree.
Commissioner Plant. I agree. As do I. Thank you, Mr. Davis. I think that concludes our agenda, except for proceeding number 24AL-0275E, the Black Hills, Colorado Phase 1, Phase 2 rate case. Ms. Friedman, Ms. Dundas, Mr. Mendelson. Take your time. Forces gathered. Ms. Friedman.
Are we ready? All right. Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Ellie Friedman of your advisory staff, and with me today, also from your advisory staff, are Mike Mendelson, Ian Fetters, Ron Davis, and Jemima Arthur Asma. Also today, we have Commission Counsel Lindsay Dundas and Ruthie Harper. So Black Hills Colorado Electric commenced this Phase 1, Phase 2 combined rate case on June 14th of 2024 with advice letter number 871. This is the first case filed by rate case filed by Black Hills since its Phase 1 rate case in 2016 and the Phase 2 rate case in 2017. Black Hills initially requested an annual revenue increase of some $37 million above its current base rate revenue of $180 million. The company reduced its request by some $11 million in its rebuttal case, stating that in response to customer feedback and in an effort to moderate rate impact, the company had revised its request down. The company now seeks a revenue requirement increase of $25.1 million. Additionally, in order to minimize the rate impact for residential customers, the company requests the Commission authorize a uniform 13.99% increase across all rate classes. Black Hills requests a cost of service based on a 2023 historic test year with a 13-month average rate base, as supported by staff and UCA, with a capital structure of 52.66% equity and 47.34% debt. The company proposes a return on equity, its ROE, of 9.83%. Additionally, Black Hills proposes to roll the transmission cost adjustment, that's the TCA, and purchase capacity cost adjustment, the PCCA, into base rates, consistent with its tariff in the last rate case. The company further requests authorization to roll recovery of the LM 6000 generation unit into base rates. Black Hills states that the revenue requirement requested here is necessary because it has invested more than $370 million in its electric system since 2016, and because it has seen increased operating costs because of inflation and high interest rates. Additionally, Black Hills states that while its residential customer base has grown, use per customer has declined, and its commercial and industrial sales have remained flat. The company notes that its service area has not seen the same economic growth as the rest of the state. 11 parties intervened in into this case: trial staff of the Commission, staff, the Office of Utility Consumer Advocate, which is UCA, City of Pueblo, County of Pueblo, and Pueblo Economic Development Corporations, collectively the Pueblo, Electrify America, LLC, Energy Outreach Colorado, EOC, Board of Waterworks of Pueblo, the Fountain Valley Authority, and Colorado Springs Utilities Southern Delivery System, collectively public utility interveners. City of Canyon City and the City of Florence, jointly Canyon City and Florence, or the cities. Colorado Solar and Storage Association and Solar Energy Industries Association, COSACIA. Western Resource Advocates and Sierra Club, WRASC. The Laborers International Union of North America, Local 720, and Wholesome US, Inc. Public comment hearings were held in Pueblo on October 29th and 30th, 2024, and in Canyon City on November 19th, 2024. The Commission also held a remote public comment hearing on December 5th of 2024. An evidentiary hearing was held December 2nd to the 6th and the 9th and 10th of 2024. Statements of position, the SOPs, were filed on January 10th, 2025 by Black Hills, staff, UCA, Canyon City, Florence, COSACIA, Electrify America, EOC, Public Utility Interveners, Pueblo, and WRASC. So, since Black Hills has not filed a rate case for some 8 years, the impact on ratepayers is particularly acute in this case. Additionally, Black Hills service territory includes areas with a high percentage of income-qualified customers. So any increase will be challenging for many Black Hills customers. I'll turn now to Ms. Arthur Asma, who will provide a summary of the comments received by the Commission.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Morning.
I'm Jemima Arthur Asma with your advisory staff. I'm here to present the comment aspect of the proceeding. Advisors tracked the public comment filed from June 30th, 2024 through February 3rd, 2025. The comment received 917, the Commission received 917 public comments. The vast majority of these were received through the Commission's electronic filing system. Now, concerns raised. Consumers express dissatisfaction about the rate increase. Generally, the comments reflected a frustration by customers that they are struggling to make ends meet and cannot afford any rate increase. They asked the Commission to reject rate increases. Some of the specific comments were: a rate increase for already struggling residents is a recipe for disaster. Citizens have to choose between staying warm, eating, or getting prescriptions. Fixed-income citizens can barely pay their electric bill, and the increase will really create hardship. The increase will cause more chance for eviction and housing insecurity. Electricity outages are too common, and customers would like the Commission to address this problem. Customers also question Black Hills requesting an increase while earning increased profit. I will now turn it back to Ellie. Thank you.
Thank you. As I mentioned, the Commission held 4 public comment hearings, 3 in person and 1 remote. And the comments in these hearings underscored the difficulties customers are having paying their bills and that a rate increase could be devastating to many. Citing affordability concerns, the public utility interveners, Canyon City, Florence, Pueblo, and the UCA encouraged the Commission to reject any rate increase in this proceeding. Pueblo's witnesses complained that high retail rates are adversely affecting residential customers and are a leading reason that Pueblo has been unable to attract business development. Pueblo's witnesses also argue that the company has poor community relations. Pueblo recommends the Commission deny any rate increase and establish a process through which Black Hills can be sold to a larger utility. Canyon City, Florence witnesses testified that the company has failed to help ratepayers understand or reduce bills, and the businesses have suffered because of reliability issues. Additionally, Canyon City, Florence witnesses expressed concern that with increased electric rates, local businesses will see declines in customer spending. They cite 2 retailers who have declined to expand their businesses for this reason and note that the area overall is struggling to attract new investment. Canyon City presents a number of mitigation strategies that the Commission could implement if it does improve a rate increase, including disallowing distribution and transmission investments as imprudent, adopting the company's parent entity's capital structure, or adopting staff's ROE and revenue requirement deficiency recommendations. Alternatively, they contend that the Commission could deny the requested increase outright because the company did not meet its burden because it failed to consider affordability and DI impacts. UCA witness Schoenhout recommends the Commission make affordable rates the primary consideration in this rate case and, as such, deny any rate increase. UCA contends that the affordability initiative that came out of the Commission's exploration of electric utility retail rates in 2020 serves as the foundation for considering affordability as critical to the Commission's review of utilities it regulates. UCA notes that Black Hills has operated successfully for 8 years under the current rates, so there's no justification for a rate increase. Ms. Schoenhart argues that denying a rate increase is in the public interest and is consistent with the economic, environmental, and social values of the state. Staff also encourages the Commission to consider affordability in its decisions in this case, citing to SB 21-272, the Distribution System Planning Statute, and case law. Staff also notes that the Equity Initiative Capstone Report, released in July of last year, concludes that utilities have a role in establishing affordable rates, and that the Affordability Initiative's initial work plan states, quote, affordability is a critical part of the Commission's oversight as it regulates Colorado gas and electric utilities. Black Hills rejects these arguments that the company has a poor relationship with businesses in the community, noting that 2 of the largest companies in Pueblo, Wholesome and CS Wind, are expanding, and noting that the businesses evaluate a number of issues when considering locations for business development or expansion, not simply the cost of electricity. The company contends that it is prepared to assist customers, and that it offers a variety of options for bill payment. The company notes that it limits access to its buildings as a cost-saving measure, but states that customers can make appointments for in-person meetings. The company argues that it offers proactive account notifications via email or text, and the contact center team is available through business hours, through phone, chat, email, and social media. Emergency service turn-on or reconnect requests have a representative available 24/7. Black Hills agrees that affordability should be taken into account when the Commission sets rates, but rejects arguments that it should be the sole determinant, as those arguments are unlawful, illogical, and inconsistent with utility rate-making principles. Black Hills maintains that it considered affordability when revising its request as presented in its rebuttal case, decreasing its request by $11 million, or about a third of its original request, and by accepting a 2023 historical test year and 13-month average rate base, then also lowering its requested ROE to 9.83%. Black Hills cites to a West Virginia Commission decision that considered affordability issues in a rate case and determined that the role of the Commission is to establish the lowest fair and reasonable rates consistent with the costs incurred by the utility to provide service. Advisors and counsel note that the Commission always has the duty of determining what rates are just and reasonable, which requires a consideration of both consumer and company interests. In setting those just and reasonable rates, we must ensure both that the rate levels provide the utility opportunity to recover its prudently incurred costs to serve customers and to maintain credit and attract capital. However, we are also expressly charged with protecting the public interest by ensuring rates are not excessive, burdensome, or unjustly discriminatory. Thus, affordability alone cannot be a justification to reject a rate case increase entirely. In this case, just in every other proceeding before the Commission, affordability is one of many considerations the Commission can utilize to determine on balance what is best for ratepayers in the company. So we agree with staff that the Commission should carefully consider each decision point in this proceeding, particularly those impacting the overall cost of service, with the backdrop of affordability and reasonably priced service. So now turning to the issues in this proceeding, the issues for decision, The first is the authorization of a test year and rate-based valuation.
I guess before we jump into the issues, I'd like to share some opening comments, if that's all right, and I'd like to give my colleagues a chance before we jump into test year. So I just want to say, for me, this has been one of the most difficult cases I've heard in my time here, as I was moved and deeply concerned by the comments we heard regarding the impact of the rate increase on customers in these communities. The comments range from the security guard who had to work 4 jobs to keep his family afloat, to Sister Nancy's efforts to help struggling customers face disconnect, to the palpable anger of the elected officials in Pueblo, to the challenges faced by the businesses and governments we heard from in Canyon City, to the frustrations of the economic development people in trying to bring new customers to the region. And I think this record shows that the average income in these communities is well below the state average and has been getting comparatively worse over time. More broadly, I also have concerns about at least 4 structural aspects of the status quo that, for me, are creating significant concerns about long-term rate impacts and where we're headed. First, Black Hills has been unable to grow revenues in any meaningful way over the past 8 years. Given that many new customers may make locational decisions based on comparative rates, I'm struggling to see how this situation improves over time. Second, both Mr. Harrington and Ms. O'Neill testified that in their multi-decade careers, they had never seen relationships as confrontational and as problematic as those between Black Hills and Pueblo. Again, I struggle to see how things improve. Third, despite the challenges facing this community and the lack of utility revenue growth, it appears that long-term rate impact concerns may not have been a central component of Black Hills' capital planning. And this record shows that from 2021 through 2024, capital spend has more than doubled, growing by a compound annual growth rate of over 35%, while sales and revenues have been stagnant. Finally, I remain concerned about Black Hills' limited access to transmission and scale that may be further raising costs. So I'm worried about the status quo and where rates are headed. At the same time, however, I believe we have legal and fiduciary duties to Black Hills, as Ms. Friedman said. That makes it difficult to dismiss any rate increase out of hand, as UCA is recommending. So at the end of the day, I propose that we make findings outlining these concerns and any others you may have. And for me, even if we can't use these findings and concerns to reach a global decision, for me, I plan on taking the public comments and these long-term rate and other concerns into account as critical context as we weigh each individual decision in light of the discretion we do have. So I don't know, Commissioner Gilman, any comments, thoughts, or are you ready to jump into the individual issues?
No, I mean, I generally share your comments and concerns, so appreciate you offering those at the onset. You know, this is a very difficult case to hear and to sit here and deliberate on. You know, there's very clear pain in those communities, especially with regard to their relationship with Black Hills. I think nearly 1,000 comments speak for themselves. The relationship between Black Hills Electric and its customers certainly appears incredibly strained, as you pointed out, and it's very difficult to kind of point the path forward and understand how this resolves in a way that really can benefit both parties moving forward. It also is not quite clear if the strain in that relationship is fully understood and felt by Black Hills with regard to some of their testimony and involvement in the case, and so that makes it further difficult. But I certainly agree with you in moving forward on each of the points here and really understanding the full context here with regard to affordability and the real challenges, especially that, you know, having some of the highest rates in the state in that particular area really pose as we move forward for the customers as well as for business development and the opportunity to get any sort of downward pressure on rates by growing that sales base. So appreciate your comments and interested to hear from Commissioner Plant.
Me too. Commissioner Plant.
Thanks. No, I share your thoughts there. I was really struck by the testimony that we received in the hearings that we did down there in the public hearings, and the comments from throughout the community on all different aspects of the community, and the ways in which the utility bills are really impacting people's lives individually and also businesses. And since I got into the legislature in 1999, and every year that I was in the legislature, the economic development challenges in the Pueblo area were always at the top of mind of the legislature. And they continue to have, an absolutely amazing community down there. But one that struggles to attract businesses. And one of the things that we heard as well was that the utility rates that they have down there have contributed to that and make it difficult for them to attract businesses. And so they're really fighting, this multi-front war, really trying to with a community that has a relatively low average income to the rest of the state, relatively high utility prices to the rest of the state, and also a really challenging economic development environment. One of the things that I've tried to think about as I was reading through all the testimony, listening to the testimony in this, is that the sort of the process of as we set rates in these rate cases, seems to me that regulatory lag is always something that comes up as a real impact on utilities, and it seems to be the sort of the thing that brings the utility back to the commission for a new rate case. And so there is going to be a regulatory lag when you have in between rate cases periods of time, but it seems as though that tension sort of goes out a certain number of years, and then that brings the utility back for a rate case, and then it goes out for a few years, brings the utility back for a rate case, and there's a reset every time. And it seems to me that a reasonable time period for that would probably be about 3 or 4 years if things are done well. And the fact that it took 8 years for the company to come back for a rate case makes me sort of question if we've done that well in the past, because it seems like that's just as was mentioned in the opening comments. Waiting 8 years and then coming in with a rate increase can be a real huge hit to any customer, because it all comes at once. So those are just some of the things that I've been thinking about as reading through this case.
Appreciate it. Commissioner Plant. Ms. Friedman, get us going.
We have a number of issues
40.
bring before you today, but I'm happy to tell you the very first one should be pretty easy. The first issue before you today is test year and rate base. Although Black Hills initially requested a 2024 current test year in response to answer testimony filed by staff in UCA, the company now requests a 2023 historic test year, HTY, with a 13-month average rate base. So the first decision point is, should the Commission authorize a 2023 HTY and a 13-month average rate base? And advisors recommend authorizing that for this procedure.
I'm good with the recommendation. Commissioner Gellman?
I agree.
I also agree.
Thank you. So now I will turn the discussion to Mr. Mendelson for the discussion of weighted average cost of capital.
Thanks for the brief presentation as we get 1 of 40. Mr. Mendelson.
Yes, good morning, Commissioners. I'm Mike Mendelson with your advisory team, and I'm here to present the arguments around setting the company's cost of capital. I'll start with capital structure and present all components of the company's WACC so that the Commission may consider the components in relation to one another. The company requests approval of a capital structure comprised of 52.66% equity and 47.34% debt. Proposed cap structure is slightly higher in equity by 27 basis points than what was approved in the company's last rate case in 2017. The company did not ask for recovery of short-term debt. Much of the argument around capital structure revolves around a Colorado Supreme Court case from 1977, Peoples Natural Gas versus PUC. Key finding in that decision says, unless it has been demonstrated by a substantial showing that ratepayers are materially prejudiced by the actual capital structure which finances utility operations, the PUC should use the actual capital structure in calculating rates. In the end, the court ruled the PUC acted appropriately when it imputed a separate capital structure specifically attributable to the utility operation and distinct from the holding company. In the instant case, in general, staff and UCA argue that the actual capital structure means how capital is raised at the holding company. Black Hills argues that actual capital structure is how they manage the operating company consistent with recent Commission orders. Staff suggests the Commission adopt BHC's capital structure from its August 2024 investor presentation, which represents 44.1% equity, 55.9% debt. Staff argues that when BHCOE needs financing, it is BHC that interacts with the capital markets. Staff also notes that the company apparently maintains no BHCOE level metrics for financial integrity or credit ratings. Staff further argues that Black Hills intentionally leveraged its finances to purchase source gas, prior owner of the distribution assets and territory. This resulted in an overall increase of financing costs as referenced in BHC's credit reports. Staff also contends that BHC is unfairly allocating debt and equity between subsidiaries and that Colorado regulated utilities were assigned higher equity ratios than requested in other jurisdictions. Advisors note that data presented in confidential table FDS 24 would allow the Commission to set the capital structure at the average of Black Hills regulated entities. Staff also points out that BHC's unregulated subsidiaries are financed with substantially more debt than regulated operating companies, including BHCOE. They argue it should be the opposite, as unregulated entities are riskier than regulated entities that have some assurance of cost recovery. With respect to UCA, during the hearings, UCA argued for adoption of the company's proposed capital structure. However, through its SOP, UCA explains that after review of the entire record, it is modifying its recommendation on capital structure and now endorses that recommended by staff. They note that the capital structure proposed by staff would reduce the necessary rate increase by several $1 million. The company makes several arguments with repeated reference to the People's decision. First, Black Hills claims that there has been no showing of material prejudice as the proposed capital structure falls squarely within the range of capital structures approved for other utilities, for which Mr. McKenzie calculated a range of roughly 46% to 55%, with an overall average of 51%, a little over. Second, that BHCOE has its own separate corporate existence and standalone per book capital structure, which is unique from the specific case in Peoples Gas. Third, that the Commission is lacking information to speculate on the correct capital structure, which would require the Commission to substitute its own judgment for that of utility management. The company claims such action is neither warranted nor permissible under applicable Colorado law. Fourth, that the requested capital structure is consistent with prior authorized capital structures and that no facts or circumstances justify a departure from the Commission's consistent treatment in the recent past. The company notes that the Commission consistently found the company's 52.66% equity to be reasonable in each of the prior 7 rate cases relevant to itself or its affiliates. And finally, Black Hills also notes that the People's Court emphasized that regulatory commissions should accord considerable deference to the judgment of utility management in regard to its capital structure. However, the company does recognize that in the People's decision, the Court did recognize the Commission may need to pierce a holding company's capital structure in order to impute capital structure appropriate for the utility operations, separate from non-utility activities. Finally, Black Hills argues that any insinuation source gas acquisition negatively impacted capitalization of the operating company is unsupported in the record. The company says that it maintained a roughly balanced capital structure at the time of the 2016 rate case, and that is what is proposed. Shall I continue on to the ROE?
Yeah, if you could get everything with WAC out, that'd be great.
Okay, great. So with respect to ROE, the company requests upon rebuttal a return on equity of 9.83%. Black Hills witness, Mr. McKenzie, contends that Colorado regulatory environment is less than supportive and notes that credit rating Moody's suggests the company has historically received inconsistent rate case outcomes here in Colorado. He also refers to the pending state legislation that shields customers from the impact of wholesale energy market price spikes as an additional risk factor. To develop his proposed ROE, Mr. McKenzie applied the following models: DCF, CAP-M, ECAP-M, utility risk premium, and expected earnings. His DCF model relied on 3 different economic forecasts, which it applied to a proxy group of 27 utilities. He notes that bond yields have increased substantially since the company's last rate case, when the company's ROE was set at 9.37%, and that forward interest rates are projected to stay high. Mr. McKenzie refers back to the increase in bond yields repeatedly as a main thrust of why the authorized ROE must be increased commensurately. To conduct his DCF models, he added value line projected dividend yields to the earnings growth values sourced from 3 different forecasters to determine a cost of equity value. He then eliminated certain values he considered illogical and then calculated an average from which he suggests a range appropriate for BHCOE. Mr. McKenzie also conducts the DCF on a group of 9 utility firms. Notably, he explains regulators do not set the returns that investors earn in the capital markets, which are a function of dividend payments, fluctuations in common stock prices, both of which are outside their control. At the hearing, Mr. McKenzie agreed that the stock market itself was a better arbiter of value than projections of expected returns conducted by outside consulting firms. To conduct his CAP-M model, Mr. McKenzie applied an average dividend yield and growth rate for the broader stock market, multiplied by the beta for each stock in his proxy group, and then made a size adjustment, which generally increased the expected return of his proxy utilities, suggesting a total ROE of 12.2%. He relies on forecasts of interest rates from blue chip capital to suggest risk-free and corporate rates are expected to remain elevated for the foreseeable future. Mr. McKenzie also included a stock flotation cost, but acknowledges that the Commission has previously rejected the inclusion of such when setting a company's ROE. Staff recommends an ROE value of 9.3% based on Ms. Segalia's evaluation using the constant growth and multi-stage DCF models. Ms. Segalia also eliminated 20 utilities from Mr. McKenzie's proxy group, including Black Hills itself, others because they are undergoing a buyout, either have hydroelectric operations, nuclear operations, or operations in Canada and Latin America. Ms. Segalia also complains that Black Hills proxy group criteria eliminates firms that have not cut dividends over the past 6 years and thus only have rosy outlooks. She also contends Black Hills applied too short of a window when averaging stock prices and that a 200-day window should be used instead of the 30-day window that they applied. She calculated DCF values and determined that change would cause a decline on alone. Staff also notes that Black Hills raised its dividend for 53 consecutive years and that the company's 2024 debt issuance was oversubscribed by roughly 5.5 times, indicating strong demand for the company's securities. Staff suggests the company's operations represent very modest risk, as roughly a third of its revenues are a direct pass-through of energy costs using the ECA, and another third is demand charges and customer charges that have little risk of non-recovery. Staff also notes the Commission recently approved a 9.3% ROE for public service. Given these factors, staff argues that proposed 9.3% will allow the company to maintain its financial integrity. UCA suggests the record does not support the company's requested 9.83% ROE, and setting it at 9.3% will save ratepayers $2.5 million. Its witness, Mr. Fernandez, notes that Black Hills did not conduct an MSDCF evaluation, even though as recently as 2015 and 2017, The respective ALJs in Black Hills rate cases placed additional weight on that approach. Mr. Fernandez suggests Mr. McKenzie's CAPM models eliminate stocks that do not pay a dividend from his weighted average, which increases the estimated ROE results. He also says that Mr. McKenzie weights the forecasted dividend yield by market cap, which thus skewed by a handful of high-growth tech companies that are not comparable to a rate-regulated utility like Black Hills. Mr. McKenzie notes that in multiple investor presentations, Black Hills provided investors with a forecasted EPS growth rate of 4 to 6%. If that methodology was changed to only include companies with forecasted EPS growth rates between 4 and 6%, his estimated unadjusted CAPM ROE would decrease from 11.6% to 6.9%. UCA also argues Mr. McKenzie projected EPS growth rates 10.1%, significantly higher than the actual long-term growth rate of the U.S. economy as measured by the GDP. They also take issue with the size adjustment applied by Mr. McKenzie and contends there is virtually no correlation between size and risk for regulated electric gas. Mr. Fernandez notes that the company calculated the risk-free rate based on historical Treasury bond yields, even though the Federal Reserve has started lowering interest rates and is expected to continue doing so. He suggests the Commission apply a short-term forecast, interest rates projected from December 2024, the same month as the evidentiary hearing. UCA notes that Black Hills utilized interest rate forecasts from blue chip financial forecasts, which Mr. Fernandez suggests is one of the worst and most biased forecasters. For more than a decade, blue chip financial forecasts have consistently forecasted interest rates higher than the actual interest rates turned out to be. On rebuttal, Mr. McKenzie argues the Fed's rate reduction was actually priced into the market, thus it did little to lower bond yields when it actually occurred. Black Hills contends a 9.83% is consistent with the average authorized ROE for vertically integrated utilities and suggests this is even too conservative. That value lags and understates what investors likely expect given current market conditions. Companies suggest staff's and UCA's analysis suffer from multiple errors, reliance on too few models, and overly restrictive proxy group selection criteria. Overall, Black Hills argues these shortcomings prove her recommendations are unreliable. The company argues UCA's proxy group also suspect, as Mr. Fernandez did not follow his own selection criteria and excluded 5 utilities of comparable risk. Further, the company suggests his analysis limited equity risk premium to historical rates of return, inaccurately reported the historical market premium, relied on highly questionable sources of projected Treasury bond yields, and failed to reflect the size adjustment. Black Hills contends staff's and UCA's witnesses simply ignored recent increases in bond yields. They say simply adjusting BHCOE's currently authorized ROE to reflect current bond yields would imply a cost of equity of 9.93%. Mr. McKenzie also suggested the Commission consider capital structure and return on equity in a combined manner. He provided information indicating the weighted cost of equity recently awarded electric utilities primarily ranged from 4.5% to 5.5%, though there were some outliers to that range. According to Mr. McKenzie, staff's and UCA's recommendation represent a weighted cost of equity of 4.1%, essentially at the tail ends of the data presented, while public service was recently awarded a value of roughly 5.2%. With respect to the cost of debt, all parties agree on the company's proposed value of 4.61. Advisors would generally recommend the Commission consider ROE and capital structure in a holistic manner, as the Commission found to be an appropriate approach in Public Service's recent gas rate case. We agree with Mr. McKenzie that the weighted cost of equity awarded is a useful metric to consider the interactive effect of equity ratio and ROE. That being said, we also find merit in staff's complaint that the company provided essentially no information regarding its own financial integrity, including any quantification, own internal return on equity invested, debt coverage, or other basic financial metrics. Accordingly, we would recommend that whatever WACC and supporting components are awarded to Black Hills, the Commission require the company to submit such evaluation of its financial condition in any advice letter request for a rate increase in the future. I'll pause here for your discussion and can answer any questions on the WAC or its components.
Thanks. I'll share some thoughts and then see if we can jumpstart a discussion. Starting with debt costs, it seems like the parties agreed that a long-term cost of debt of 4.61% was appropriate, as Mr. Mendelson said. Given that for me, rate making is more an art than an exact science, as Mr. McKenzie acknowledged in his oral testimony, I just round to 4.6%. Going to the 100th basis to a single basis point seems like false precision to me. I propose a rate of equity range from 9.3 to 9.5%. I believe this range is consistent where the analytics land, for example, looking at current dividend yield plus projected earnings. I'd also point out, as Mr. Mendelson said, that there was no analysis of the Black Hill, Colorado's electric internal rate of return on equity or debt credits metrics on this record. I found the battle of the models to maybe favor UCA and staff relying on DCS and other proxy approaches as against the Black Hills modeling. And again, in our TBC order, I'm assuming that Mr. Mendelson will analyze the pros and cons of each approach in more detail. On the common equity ratio, for me, any determination about the actual capital structure should start with the NAWRC language I discussed with Mr. Stevens, which I'm now quoting. The capital structure is typically measured at the corporate level at which the utility actually interfaces with and is disciplined by the capital markets. As Ms. Segala argued, starting with a holding company capital structure as the actual one seems like common sense to me. This approach also seems consistent with Peoples Natural Gas, where the court found that the holding company, Northern Natural Gas Company, was the entity with the actual capital structure. In that case, the PUC, as validated by the court, adjusted the actual capital structure of the holding company to impute an operating company capital structure given the unregulated subs and to avoid prejudicing customers. I also have difficulty just accepting the operating company capital structure put forward by the company as the actual, given that it appears to largely be based on PUC orders from many years ago, and the company may have a financial incentive to drive up the common equity ratio. So for me, I'd find here that the actual capital structure in this case is the one at the holding company level, where the company's capital decisions interface with and are disciplined by the market. At the same time, however, I can't get as low as the common equity ratio of 44%, as both staff and UCA suggest. I think the record, particularly Mr. Stevens' testimony, convinced me that it is inappropriate to just adopt the actual holding company capital structure as is. At a minimum, I think we need to account for the project finance projects from the owned by the holding company in developing an appropriate structure. I've also reviewed the common equity ratios of both Black Hills regulated and unregulated subsidiaries that shows a range of common equity ratios for the Black Hills entities, with most above that of the holding company. Although it is true that both Black Hills Colorado Gas and an Arkansas Gas subsidiary, as based on a 2024 settlement, seem to have similar common equity ratios as the holding company. In summary, taking all this into account and recognizing that rate making is far from an exact science, I propose a common equity ratio of 47 to 49%. For me, this seems like the capital structure that would result from reasonable adjustments to the actual holding company capital structure. It also splits the difference between the Black Hills and staff proposals while still being significantly higher than the capital ratio, common equity ratio of the holding company, which again interfaces with and is disciplined by capital markets. Finally, a lower common equity ratio also seems like a useful tool to help manage long-term rate impacts and encourage greater capital discipline. Putting these pieces together into a comprehensive whole, I propose a WAC of 6.9%. But I think we have a wide range of discretion here. And happy to go up or down based on where you guys are coming out. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Commissioner Gilman, anywhere you'd like to go.
Yeah, thank you. So your proposal would be to provide those ranges for ROE and equity ratio, but set the WACC at 6.9%?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a fairly reasonable place to land for me. I mean, this was further complicated. I think a complicated case was further complicated by the corporate structure here, and really the difficulty in assessing not just, I mean, a real lack of information on kind of the financial metrics and integrities of the operating company specifically, but kind of how muddied it gets with all of the unregulated entities and really kind of wildly different equity percentages for all those that it operates within. So I think you have a fairly reasonable proposal here to help us utilize that information that we do know and try to come to the most reasonable outcome, including with the analysis provided by staff and UCA on what a reasonable outcome would be here. So I would be generally supportive of your ranges on your WACC.
Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, I agree. I came out pretty close to that in my calculations. Yeah, I think that I came out with the exact same numbers on the ROE and pretty close on the capital structure. I think as Commissioner Gilman pointed out, the capital structure is just like is really hard nut to crack because you've got the regulated entities, you've got the unregulated entities, and clearly it seems to me as though there is a subsidization of unregulated entities by the regulated entities, which maybe is understandable because that's your low risk, that's kind of subsidizing your high risk, and I think that probably happens in every portfolio. But the question is, how do we set our rates, relative to all that? And I think that the range that you set out is fairly consistent with the regulated entities, recognizing that at the holding company level, the capital structure is much different. And so I would support that with the 6.9 WACC.
Ms. Friedman, does that, you want to go to the LM 6000? Does that give you what you need, Mr. Mendelson?
Commissioners, did that include a vote for additional information in the next filing?
I just leave it to Black Hills. It's their case to put forward.
So the next issue before the commissioners is the LM 6000, whose costs have been recovered through the Clean Air, Clean Jobs Act. That's the CACJA adjustment, which Black Hills requests to have roll into base rates. As background, the LM 6000 is a 40-megawatt gas peaking plant granted a Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity, a CPCN, in 2014. In the company's last Phase 1 rate case in 2016, the Commission authorized a 2015 HTY, but with the LM 6000 coming online at the end of 2016, the Commission allowed recovery of costs associated with the LM 6000 through the CACJA with the capital structure reflecting the financing of that unit at the time, which was 33% equity and 67% debt. The resulting WACC for that unit was 6.02%. So Black Hills now proposes to eliminate the CACJA adjustment and roll the investments, expenses, and revenues recovered through that adjustment into base rates. The company argues that this amounts to $5.2 million being included in base rates, but because the CACJA adjustment revenue requirement is $6.4 million, the net will be $1.2 million annual savings for customers. Staff objects to moving the CACJA into base rates because while the company currently earns 6.02% on the LM 6000, moving cost recovery into base rates would mean the company would earn the authorized WACC on the asset, resulting in higher costs to ratepayers. UCA also objects to moving the LM 6000 recovery into base rates and advocates maintaining capital structure previously authorized. UCA argues that the company has collected return on this asset for some 7 years without Commission review of the asset's valuation. UCA contends that the $1.2 million the company says will be saved in revenue requirement is actually only a function of updated net plant and service value. UCA calculates that when the plant's 2023 depreciated value is considered, the decreased revenue requirement is actually about $686,000. UCA also argues that the company has already recovered some $51.5 million from ratepayers based on the inaccurate net plant valuation. UCA argues that maintaining the CACJA for the LM6000 is consistent with cost recovery expectations set out initially and will make the overall rates more affordable for Black Hills customers. UCA recommends evaluating the LM6000 annually and updating the depreciation schedule to ensure full ratepayer benefit of the depreciating value. In its SOP, Pueblo agrees with staff and recommends no change in the recovery mechanism of the LM6000. Black Hills rejects these arguments that the CACJA cost recovery should continue for the LM6000. The company specifically objects to continuing to use a unique capital structure applied to the asset in the 2016 rate case. The company cites to decision C16-1140 in that case, in which the Commission noted that special treatment of the LM6000 financing costs was to be, quote, for first few years of the generating unit's operation. Black Hills maintains that the LM6000 is financed in the same manner as all of the company's assets, thus should be subject to the same return as all of its investments. So the Commission's decision on this point is, should the cost recovery of the LM6000 be rolled into rate base as proposed by Black Hills? And pause for your discussion or offer a recommendation.
No, if you can go to the next item and put that together with this one, and then not give us a recommendation,
do
but
the whole thing.
Yeah, if you can go to item 4, I'd appreciate it.
So associated with that is excess tax collection associated with LM6000 that staff contends Black Hills has overcollected some $3.7 million in taxes associated with the LM6000 because the company failed to make the necessary adjustment when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the TCJA, was implemented in 2017 and continued to collect taxes at the 35% corporate rate rather than the TCJA's 21%. Staff calls for reimbursement of the $3.7 million amortized over 3 years. Pueblo echoes staff's concerns about the taxes collected and contends that Black Hills is obligated to follow the purpose of 2017's TCJA proceeding and comply with the requirement that the company reimburse ratepayers for any tax collections above the authorized rate. Black Hills argues it is not required to refund any money because in the Commission's decision in the 2016 rate case, there was no mechanism for true-up. The company cites Decision C16-1140 as, quote, the annual revenue requirement to be collected by the CACJA adjustment rider shall not change unless modified by the Commission in a future Phase 1 rate case proceeding. However, the class cost allocators used to establish the rate value shall be modified as necessary based on results of the company's next Phase 1 rate case. Because the CACJA adjustment rider will no longer serve as a special regulatory practice under Section 40-3.2-2073 CRS, the mechanisms will not be used to true up costs with revenues after December 31, 2016. The final true up will be within 6 months beginning July 1st, 2017, consistent with the terms of the existing CACJA adjustment rider tariff sheet. So Black Hills characterizes staff's recommendation for reimbursement of taxes collected above the federal tax rate as single-issue rate making, and argues that the Commission could not have reset the LMS 6000's revenue requirement on the tax rate alone, but would have had to also review all components, including the authorized WACC. Black Hills contends that staff's attempt to recover costs is retroactive rate making here. As to the Commission's TCJA proceeding, Black Hills notes that the Commission acknowledged that the Commission did not propose a TCJA-related adjustment for the LM6000, stating that any adjustment would be made in the company's next Phase 1 rate case. So for this issue, the question before the Commission is, should the Commission direct the company to reimburse ratepayers for taxes collected for the LM6000 that were above the 21% corporate rate, tax rate? So I'll turn it back to the Commissioners for discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Friedman. So I'm going to mush these two issues together and say, I don't think it makes sense to maintain a different capital structure for this one asset almost 10 years later. So I'd probably just roll this asset into rate base going forward. At the same time, however, and as a condition for rolling this asset into base rates, I'd lower the rate base by the nominal dollar value of the collection of corporate taxes, i.e. not accounting for the time value of money. I don't think the PUC has ever ruled on this tax issue, and I'd combine these two issues into one as we place the LM 6000 capital into base rates. So I put that out there for you, and I'd also say I think we're going to bring this back to the next CWM. So I understand this idea is hitting you for the first time. But if you have any thoughts, comments on either issue or my proposal, that'd be great.
Yeah, and perhaps when we bring this back, Ms. Freeman, you can help us understand, especially with the WAC we discussed, kind of the actual financial impacts. I found the analysis within the actual proceeding difficult to follow because I think it was somewhat intentionally misleading and assuming we would stick with somehow a 5-year-old tax rate if it stayed as a rider. So there's some work to be done here, I think, to help us better understand the math as it stands today. So you'd say roll it into base rates. And what's your, I think staff suggestion was to spread the $3.7 million in as they put over collection over 3 years. Is that you would divide 3.7 by 3 and reduce rate base by that amount?
Yeah, something
as
like
we
that.
move forward. Yeah. I'm fairly on board with that. I think I agree with you. I think it's probably more logical at this point to roll it into rate base. But I agree with you, and largely agree with staff as to their objection to the overcollection in taxes. Certainly these were complicated proceedings that had to be hit in real time, and the company has much more of the information, and I do think kind of took some liberties in moving forward with a tax rate that just plain and simple was not their actual tax rate at the time. And so I think that's a reasonable place to land per your suggestion.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think this is, a change in law that changes the tax rate is more than just a fluctuation in the market that could go either way. It's an actual change in law. And so, yeah.
And the commission adjusted it elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly, because, it's that's what the law says. So I think I think your approach makes a lot of sense, and we can revisit it when we see the actual numbers.
Does that give you what you need, Ms. Friedman?
Sure. So we'll mark this to bring back next week, and we'll take what you agreed to for the capital structure and the WAC and apply that to this particular asset.
Yeah, and if needed, I just want to give my colleagues a chance to talk to advisors and counsel as they had not heard that idea before.
All right, then. So next, I'm going to turn the discussion to Mr. Transmission Wheeling Revenues.
Davis.
Yes, I'm Ron Davis again, and that was a very interesting walk through history for me, listening to the LM 6000 issue and the change in the tax rate. And so I'm fortunate to have a very simple issue to start with.
Thank you.
In the cost of service study, the revenues that are collected from wholesale customers are credited against the calculation of the base rate revenue requirement for retail customers. Staff points out that the company's 2023 rebuttal test year includes about $6.7 million of revenue from transmission of electricity by others. Staff further notes that Black Hills recommends a known and measurable adjustment to this revenue credit due to the expected expiration of a transmission wheeling contract with Tri-State, and that accounts for about $5 million. Staff argues that the transmission wheeling revenues the company receives are volatile, and as demonstrated by the termination of the Tri-State contract, they're also not within the company's control. Staff argues that those particular features lend themselves towards rider recovery, similar to fuel costs, or the revenues from off-system sales, both of which are accounted for in the Energy Cost Adjustment, or ECA. Staff ultimately recommends that revenues associated with transmission wheeling be accounted for either in the company's quarterly ECA or its annual Transmission Cost Adjustment, or TCA. Black Hills posits that if the Commission wants to recognize wholesale transmission revenues in the TCA, then the TCA should be modified to include all transmission-related costs to better comport with the matching principle. So staff's recommendation, I think, puts forward two decision points for the Commission to frame this topic. First, how should transmission wheeling revenues be treated in this particular cost of service? And also, should the Commission address staff's suggestion to credit these revenues in a rider to offset rider revenue requirements instead?
I think we'd welcome a recommendation on this one, Mr. Davis.
Okay. We recommend that the Commission authorize Black Hills, in this case, to apply the revenues collected during the test year from the transmission wheeling service against the base rate costs in the determination of the final revenue requirement. And we also suggest that the Commission should approve the pro forma adjustment to that test year amount to reflect the known and measurable impact of Tri-State no longer taking the associated service. While staff may have shown that transmission wheeling revenues are volatile and beyond the company's control, I think its analysis is incomplete with respect to the associated costs those revenues are intended to offset. The practice of crediting transmission wheeling revenues in a base rate retail cost of service study reflects a long-standing practice. Ongoing transmission-related operations and maintenance costs and rolled-in transmission capital investment costs are accounted for in Black Hills rate base and base rates. Staff further provides no guidance for how to handle these costs vis-a-vis wholesale customers upon the implementation of its proposal. So, in sum, I recommend continuing the practice of crediting the transmission wheeling revenues in the retail cost of service for base rates and to not move the costs out of base rates in order to make that revenue requirement adjustment applicable in either the ECA or the TCA.
Commissioner Gilman.
I agree with your recommendation.
Commissioner Plant.
I also agree.
As do I. Mr. Fetters.
Howdy, can y'all hear me okay?
We can.
Excellent. Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Ian Fetters with your advisory staff, and I'm going to talk about a couple of rate-based issues. The first rate-based issue is fleet investment. Black Hills testifies that it has invested $13.8 million in vehicles since its last Phase 1 rate case, including $2.1 million invested in its HTY. Black Hills asserts that the historical investments in these vehicles are prudent, used and useful, and necessary to provide service to its electric customers. UCA recommends disallowing about $650,000 of fleet investment in the HTY. UCA observes that fleet investment has increased significantly in the past few years and finds that the actual investment in fleet can also vary considerably from the budgeted amounts for each year. UCA asserts that there is no increase in the number of vehicles purchased to justify the higher budget. UCA proposes to limit the fleet investment in the HTY to an average based on the lower of the budgeted or actual amounts over the years since the company's last rate case. This averaging would effectively result in a disallowance of about $650,000 in the HTY. In rebuttal, Black Hills says that the increased investment in recent years is not due to an increase in the number of vehicles purchased, rather due to increased costs in vehicles, increased costs per vehicle due to inflation and environmental features. The company emphasizes that the active vehicle count is indeed slightly lower in 2023 than the 2015 to 2023 average, and states that it only replaces vehicles when they meet age and mileage guidelines. The company cites several examples of vehicles becoming more expensive, all increasing anywhere from 64% up to more than 100% since 2016. and the company reasserts that these vehicle investments are useful, and necessary to provide safe and reliable electric service to its customers. So the decision point on this issue is, should fleet investment be adjusted down, effectively resulting in a $650,000 disallowance? And I can pause for discussion or offer a recommendation.
Okay with a recommendation? Yeah, if you can give us a recommendation, that'd be great.
Sure. Advisors recommend including the entire fleet investment in rate base and accordingly denying UCA's request to adjust fleet investment down to an average. Black Hills is seeking recovery of its actual vehicle costs, which have been demonstrated to be used and useful, and has provided evidence supporting the increased investment in recent years. While costs have increased, there is nothing unusual about the fleet investment in this case.
Commissioner Gellman?
I agree.
Commissioner Plant?
I also agree.
As do I.
Thank you, Commissioners. Now turning to production meters also within rate base. Black Hills included $680,000 of production meters in its cost of service study. Production meters are used to measure how much energy is produced by net metering customers. The company contends that in its last Phase 2 case, the ALJ rejected the recovery of production meters specifically from the net metering customers alone, but did not preclude the company from recovering production meters altogether. Black Hills asserts that production meters are necessary to identify actual behind-the-meter production, identify the number of RECs produced for compliance with the renewable energy standard, and calculate the system peak net of renewable generation. Staff proposes to disallow approximately $525,000 of production meters from rate base, specifically those meters associated with customers who have not opted for the production-based incentive option and instead are net metering only. Staff contends that there are publicly available estimating tools such as NREL's PV watts that can provide reasonable estimates for RECs and calculation of the net system peak without the need to install and maintain production meters. Staff cites the various Commission rules, with Rule 3664E2 stating that utilities, quote, shall not require more than 1 meter per customer to comply with net metering rules, and Rule 3658FX saying that the calculation of annual expected kWh for the standard rebate offer will be based on PV watts or an equivalent software. Staff also notes that in PSCO's Renewable Energy Standard Proceeding 19A0369E, the Commission rejected PSCO's request to require production meters for small customers and instead directed PSCO to use PV watts for its data needs. In rebuttal, Black Hills continues to ask for cost recovery on production meters, asserting that these meters are used and useful. The company provides some background on why actual capabilities could be different than estimates and provides an analysis comparing estimated to actual production in a single month, which finds the difference between estimated and actual production totals approximately $82,000 in that month. So the decision point is, should the Commission disallow approximately $525,000 of production meters associated with net metering only customers? And I can pause for discussion or give a recommendation.
I'd welcome a recommendation.
Advisors recommend disallowing costs for the production meters associated with these customers. Used and useful is one element of rate making, but need not be the only principle the Commission employs to set just and reasonable rates. The Commission rules indicate that estimating tools are sufficient for those customers, and the use of estimating tools would be consistent with the Commission's past decisions. While the company has demonstrated that the meters are more accurate than estimating tools, they are clearly not necessary to providing utility service.
Commissioner Gellman.
Thanks. I wholeheartedly agree, Mr. Fetters. And I actually found the company's analysis where they pointed to the difference in actual production and projected to be really broad and inaccurate, honestly, not using any tools that I'm really familiar with. And furthermore, in their advocacy, didn't point to any actual use on the system. They pointed to these big differences they found. They didn't notify the customers. They didn't do anything with the information, which I think kind of further points to the fact that this is not necessary or serving any real purpose in the system that they could point to. And so it appears to be just an expense being passed through to customers without any real value to the system at this point. So I certainly agree with you, Mr. Fetters.
Commissioner Plant.
I agree as well.
As do I.
Thank you, Commissioners. I'll turn it back to Mr. Davis.
I'm now going to present a decision on expenses, and the first will be rate case expenses. In its direct testimony, Black Hills requested recovery of expenses for litigating this case of about $450,000. In rebuttal, however, it lowered the amount to just over $266,000 and agreed to a 4-year amortization period for the recovery of that level of expenses. In its closing statement of position, Black Hills states that it's expecting the final expenses to come in below $266,000. Black Hills asked the Commission to look at the total rate case expense and recognize that the overall expenses for this case are much less than are customary and award full recovery. In its answer testimony, staff presents a relatively complex response. If the Commission is to grant a rate case expense for this case, staff suggests about $120,000, and that reflects no recovery of most of the costs of outside legal counsel and no recovery of the ROE consultant's costs, and it also reflects a reduction to what is categorized as other rate case expenses. In its closing SOP, staff recommends disallowance of any cost that cannot be supported by a payment receipt. Staff further recommends disallowances of travel costs and expenses related to food and alcohol. In its SOP, staff presents no final number for the Commission to authorize. In its SOP, UCA explains how its recommendations regarding the rate case expenses have shifted. UCA recommends full allowance of the $71,000 of costs for the company's outside depreciation witness. And with respect to those other expenses, UCA states that the company presented evidence that support why those costs should be recovered, except for those travel expenses. However, consistent with its answer testimony, UCA suggests that the Commission disallow all expenses associated with the company's outside ROE consultant. UCA argues that it would make sense to train an in-house employee rather than hiring an outside ROE consultant. UCA further seeks to examine whether the final invoices of the company's sole outside attorney are just and reasonable once final invoices are presented. UCA suggests that once the final amount is determined, a 50-50 split be used between ratepayers and shareholders. UCA estimates that the annual expense in the cost of service study would come in around $27,000 for a total of approximately $108,000 over 4 years. However, UCA cautions that that this is just an estimate and that final actual amounts should be revealed at an assumed technical conference. Black Hills rejects UCA's proposal to split the rate case expenses between ratepayers and shareholders, noting that the company is allowed to recover its actual rate case expenses in accordance with prior Commission decision and Colorado case law. The company also argues that UCA presents no evidence that experts of the necessary caliber to support Black Hills' requests regarding authorized ROE would accept an in-house position at a salary that would result in any savings. So there are two decision points here. The first is what amortization should be used to set the annual expense level for the cost of service. And second, what is the amount of rate case expenses for this proceeding that should be amortized?
If you would care to give us a recommendation, that'd be great.
Okay. Black Hills and UCA seem to have converged on a 4-year amortization, and we agree that that is reasonable for setting the cost of service amount. The Commission's recent decision on rate case expense recovery for public service in its gas case can also guide the Commissioners on the same issue here, and that's in light of the enactment of Senate Bill 291. And along those lines, we recommend that the Commission grant recovery of an amount not to exceed approximately $184,000. That amount divided by 4 would be $46,000. This derives from $50,000 of outside legal fees, the full amount of the depreciation consultant fees, and half of the ROE consultant fees, and $30,000 of those other fees, but that needs to be less any travel-related expenses if they're included in that $30,000.
Commissioner Goman,
I agree with your recommendation.
Commissioner Plant,
I also agree.
as do I.
The next issue, I think, is the litigation expense tracker. UCA recommends that after the amortization of allowed rate case expenses is complete, the Commission should require the company to file what we call a negative GRSA to terminate such cost recovery after that point. UCA argues that both that this negative GRSA is consistent with the intent of Senate Bill 291 to limit the amount of rate case expenses that are recovered from ratepayers, and that a negative GRSA is needed to prevent any over-recovery, which is a topic we'll discuss later. Addressing this issue from an entirely different perspective, Black Hills seeks an expense tracker in the form of a regulatory count for litigation expenses as they are incurred between the rate cases. The tracker would account for dollars above or below the amount approved in base rates and would account for it in either a regulatory asset or a regulatory liability. UCA opposes the approval of a litigation expense tracker, arguing that such a tracker would offer only a delayed benefit to customers once those amortizations are complete, and that allowing a return set at the weighted average cost of capital on any deferred balance is consistent with the intent of Senate Bill 291. So there are two decision points that are coming from these competing proposals. Should the Commission require Black Hills to file a negative GRSA upon the completion of the 4-year amortization? Or in the alternative, should the Commission authorize Black Hills to create a tracker for rate case expenses such that over-collections offset incurred expenses between the rate cases?
I would probably not do the tracker, but I sort of like the 4-year declining GRSA. Do you guys have thoughts on that, or?
You're saying a negative GRSA after 4 years?
No, it just declines over time as the thing gets amortized, as the expenses get amortized.
I mean, I'd be fine with the recommendation here to hear out all the points, but I'm happy if you want to elaborate as well.
You didn't like the declining GRSA, is that right, Mr. Davis?
Well, my recommendation would be to not do a negative GRSA after 4 years, and that the collection of the annual expense would continue over time.
Maybe we should have done this more offline, but isn't that how we got into the overcollection in the past? So what's the downside of doing the negative GRSA?
Well, maybe I should present the overcollection.
Yeah, if you would.
Okay. Give me a second, and I will find. Okay, this is what we framed as the alleged over-recovery of the rate case expenses. Okay. So staff contends here that Black Hills has significantly over-recovered rate case expenses since its last base rate proceeding, and that's simply due to the passage of time. According to staff, the Commission authorized recovery of $550,000 of expenses in the last rate case, and that corresponded to an annual amortization expense of $183,000. At that rate of recovery, staff says that the company would have fully recovered those $550,000 of incurred expenses by January 1st of 2020. And since that last rate case, the company has recovered some $962,000 of what it calls excess rate case expenses, and staff thus suggests that the Commission implement a negative rate case expense in this case of $842,000 that would be amortized over 2 years. In response, Black Hills characterizes staff's recommendation as retroactive rate making. The company argues that staff admitted that the Commission did not explicitly set a tracker for rate case expenses in the previous case, and it further argues that staff's position relies on a misapplied reference to the inputs to the cost of service model used to establish the rates in the previous rate case. According to the company, the Commission makes no mention of what happens to this cost of service input if the company does not file a rate case within the 3-year amortization period. Black Hills concludes that the previous rate case decision cannot possibly serve as formal notice that a tracker was indeed established. So the decision point around that dispute is whether the Commission should require Black Hills to adjust its cost of service study, in this case, to correct for the over-collection of rate case expenses as recommended by staff.
I asked you to put one more issue on the table just to complicate it further. Can you do
Sure.
the next one too, where Black Hills is seeking recovery of other litigation expenses outside the historic test year, so we have the whole package on
Sure.
the table?
No problem.
Thank you.
So here, we go back to the company's direct testimony, and it seeks to recover in this case approximately $2.5 million of litigation expenses incurred in cases since the previous electric base rate proceeding. The company proposes to amortize these costs over 24 months. In its closing SOP, Black Hills repeats its request for the recovery of costs from its 2023 distribution system plan proceeding, the costs from its 2017 Phase 2 rate design proceeding, and the costs from its 2022 Electric Resource Plan and Clean Energy Plan proceeding, that's 22A 230E, but about $140,000 less for a case that it's not seeking cost recovery for any longer. Black Hills restates its position that the Commission previously approved regulatory assets in each of those cases for the company to be able to seek recovery of those costs in the next rate case, or what's now the instant proceeding. The company explains that the consultants that were hired in those cases bring expertise for which the company lacks in-house, specifically pointing to that 2022 ERP Clean Energy Plan case, where the company needed to hire an independent evaluator, energy analysts, forecasting and modeling consultants, accounting experts, and legal counsel to navigate the Phase 1 and Phase 2 portions of the proceeding, which only recently came to a final decision. The company further states that it introduced evidence of receipts for all recovery sought and removed any recovery request for additional amounts that were not supported by an invoice. In its answer testimony, staff objects to Black Hills' proposal, arguing that the Commission has not authorized recovery of those expenses from the other proceedings, so the request to recover those amounts here should be denied. Staff repeats this position in its SOP, simply arguing again that there is no prior Commission decision authorizing recovery of such expenses, and they should be denied. UCA also contests the proposed recovery of these expenses. In its closing SOP, however, UCA calculates the total costs of the previous cases as supported by invoices and other documentation to be around $2 million and recommends that the Commission split these costs evenly between ratepayers and the company, and to apply a 2-year amortization. UCA states that that $2 million of spending is overwhelmingly for consultants and outside attorneys. And in support of that 50-50 split, UCA contends that those provisions in Senate Bill 291 support the limiting of rate case expenses for outside consulting and legal services. So UCA argues that 291 applies to these prior cases because the statutory language focuses on the cost recovery of such expenses from ratepayers, and that, quote, the temporal focus is on when cost recovery is requested and not when the underlying costs are incurred. So those are the positions, right?
Yeah. So I guess I don't understand why it's not single-issue rate making to allow Black Hills to recover $2.5 million of expenses incurred prior to the historic test year, but it is somehow single-issue rate making to focus on the over-recovery of costs from the prior 2016 rate case that has stayed in rates for 4 years after when the costs were fully recovered. So I'd probably just apply those revenues, the over-recoveries from the 2016 rate case as a partial offset to the pre-historic year litigation costs, and, just do it on a nominal value basis without trying to account for the time value of money. And then I sort of like UCA's idea put these rate case costs in the GRSA, so once the costs are recovered, it disappears and it doesn't stay in rates for forever, which could cause that argument that staff's making. So, I mean, there's four issues. One, I wouldn't do the tracker. Two, I'd use the over recovery of the 2016 rate case expenses to offset the out of historical test year expenses that Black Hills seeking recovery for. And then four, I'd probably do a declining GRSA so that, you know, those rate case expenses didn't hang around forever. And again, we can come back to this next week if you want to talk to advisors and council.
Yeah, I think they'd benefit from that. But just and maybe Mr. Davis can help me clarify. I didn't understand the proposal to be a declining GRSA, but rather the imposition of a negative GRSA once the rate case expenses have worked their way through, once they're fully amortized. So there is no kind of linear track. It's just all of a sudden that's imposed because the rate case expenses have been fully amortized. Is that correct?
Yes, I think you got that right, and I think the chair agrees with you.
And I apologize for my sloppy language.
Okay.
Thank you,
Sorry.
Mr. Davis.
This is fun. You know, precision is not always the virtue, especially in this site. I would appreciate, the week to kind of consider this and talk with council and advisors on it. I generally agree with you that it offends my senses for them to collect more than their actual rate case expenses, it being something embedded in rates that just continues to move forward. That being said, that can work either way, depending if when you file the next rate cases before or after that amortization horizon. And so I don't have any expectation we'll be on an 8-year cycle. People in 2016 probably didn't think that either. So I don't have any idea if this is like a durable issue going forward. But I'd be happy to consider so just so I understand, your recommendation is offset the basically like 2020 to 2024, I guess it would be, over recovery of rate case expenses, use those to offset what was kind of the real-time additional incurred expenses from other cases to whatever degree that nets.
Yeah, that were outside the historical test year.
Okay. And then you said no tracker.
Which was consistent with Mr. Davis's recommendation.
No tracker for the current rate case expenses.
Going forward.
Going forward. Okay. I think what I'm trying to square in my head is you said no tracker, but like the negative GRSA, which I kind of envisioned as the same as the tracker, more or less.
Mr. Davis, can you help us clarify the tracker argument? Maybe I shouldn't have brought that up.
Well, I presented the tracker as Black Hills' response to a negative GRSA. So what Black Hills is suggesting is that there be an amount of rate case expense established in this case, and then the amounts above or below that would be held in this regulatory account. And then at the next rate case, that amount, whatever it is, would be reconciled in the context of that future revenue requirement. That's one way to not have a negative GRSA, because the costs are going to be accounted for over time. What UCA has proposed is that once that amortization is over, cost collection at that level is terminated, and without a tracker, it's just over. We look at a new fresh test year in the future, and to the extent there have been commission decisions approving a regulatory account for consideration later, those would come back in that future rate case.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to torture you all through all of the nitty-gritty details on this, but there are a lot of little tangents here. So yeah, I'd appreciate taking the week. I mean, I think that, I'm generally somewhat favorable to your suggestion here in working towards some netting there. But I'd like a chance to talk it over with advisors and council.
Anything to add, Commissioner Plant?
No,
I think that the proposal makes a lot of sense in a number of ways. It's kind of kooky though, because we say that the expense is, in the last case, we said the expense is $550,000. And Mr. Stoffel said that he didn't expect to come in for 3 years, and so they said, okay, we'll amortize this over 3 years, and then they just collected it for 8. It kind of boggles the mind, because you would think once you collected the money that was approved, then you'd be done. And so now we're trying to figure out ways to account using accounting. If they keep on collecting the money over what is owed, then we would somehow be able to account for it. And I don't know which way is better, if a negative GRSA or making a regulatory asset. My sense would be a negative GRSA would be better. One question I did have though is I think that one of the issues is around the historic rate expenses, and there is an argument for a 50% or the full allocation, and I didn't know if we made a decision on that.
I'm proposing full recovery, but offset by the over recovery in the rate.
Okay. I need to look at that more over the next week, maybe, but generally, I'm supportive.
Does that give us what we need for now, Mr. Davis? And sorry for complicating.
No, that's fine. We'll bring this back up. I think the 4 related issues are all well discussed, and I don't think there will be a need for a presentation. We can just take this up for a final vote next week. We are looking at about 4 minutes to 11. I think, Ms. Friedman, we could get through the revenue requirement issues. Shall we continue and then see where we are when Ms. Friedman is finished with the revenue requirement issues?
Are you guys okay? Do you need a break, or are you good? Good. Push on. Appreciation.
All right. So the next issue is the depreciation expense, which Black Hills employs a year-end annualization for depreciation expense, but UC argues that since the company is using a 13-month average rate base, it should use a corresponding 13-month depreciation expense calculation. This UCA calculates would increase by using the year-end plant revenue requirement is increased by about $1 million. So in support of its argument for a 13-month average depreciation expense, UCA cites the Commission's decision in a recent Atmos energy rate case in which the Commission disallowed Atmos's use of year-end plant for depreciation on a 13-month rate base. Black Hills counters that UCA is comparing 2 different things. Depreciation expense is included in the revenue requirement study for a dollar-for-dollar recovery, but rate base is associated with the company's authorized return. Given that, rate base valuation is only meaningful in calculating the return component of the revenue requirement and has no bearing on the actual depreciation expense the company incurs. Black Hills contends the Commission has previously authorized year-end plant for depreciation and argues that in the Commission's decision rejecting Atmos's use of depreciation on a year-end plant, the Commission stated that Atmos failed to provide an explanation as to why year-end plant was appropriate. Black Hills argues that it has provided an explanation in direct and rebuttal testimony, and that this methodology has been upheld previously. So the question before the Commission is, should the Commission authorize a year-end annualized depreciation expense as proposed by Black Hills? Make a recommendation we'd like to discuss.
I might do the 13-month average and making it consistent with what we're doing from rate base. Any thoughts on that?
I think that seems relatively appropriate from like a consistency and matching perspective. I'd be happy to take the week to talk about the pros and cons with the advisors on that in particular.
Commissioner Plant, take the week.
I feel like we had this issue come up in the Piesco case as well, and there was an argument that the depreciation happens at a fixed time. And so it didn't make as much sense to apply the average, but I'm happy to take the week and we can sort of
It was
evaluate that.
Atmos, not Piesco.
Atmos.
This was in an Atmos case a couple of years ago, and that's the case that's cited too. I'm trying to remember if this was a specific issue in public service. There have been there have been cases before, proceedings before, where the commission did authorize the company to do what Black Hills is doing, to do the separate thing because of this separate type of application. But we can take a week. We can defer.
Yeah, I would do the 13-month average, but my colleagues could have an opportunity to chat with you. That'd be great.
Sure.
And then on the employee compensation, I think we'd take a recommendation on all three.
Sure. I was give a little background on that. But
yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna combine two of them at least. So the annual incentive program, the AIP, and the short-term incentive program, the STIP. The AIP allows employees with positions lower than director level the opportunity to earn an annual incentive award based on performance and salary grade. For non-union employees, the AIP percentage cannot exceed 150% of target. Union employees, on the other hand, receive a negotiated AIP target percentage. So consistent with previous commission decisions, the company capped the AIP cost at 15% of annual base salary on an employee-by-employee basis in this case. UCA agrees with this and recommends the commission authorize it. Staff agrees, but argues the company made the AIP adjustment in the CTY but not in the HTY, and requests an adjustment of $50,000 in the revenue requirement as a placeholder for limiting recovery. Black Hills in rebuttal clarifies that all AIP adjustments made in the HTY carried forward to the CTY by default, and so therefore rejects staff's argument for the adjustment. For the STIP is a percentage of annual base salary applicable to employees in positions of director and above. It is calculated in part by salary grade and market rate. As of December 31st, 2023, Black Hills had 2 STIP qualifying employees. The company also receives an allocated portion of costs for STIP payout for qualifying Black Hills Service Corporation company employees. Consistent with recent commission decisions, again, the company is requesting approval to recover those expenses for direct Black Hills Colorado Electric employees and Black Hills Service Company employees, subject to the 15% cap on a per-employee basis. Again, UCA recommends the commission authorize this. Staff agrees with that, but again, argues that the company failed to make the appropriate adjustments. So in rebuttal, company witness Johnson contends the company did make the appropriate adjustments in both the CTY and the HTY, capping those expenses at 15%, and the company requests commission reject the staff's recommendation because it would result in double counting the STIP expense beyond the proposed 15% cap. I can move on to the LTIP. Black Hills explains this program is offered in the form of restricted stock and performance shares awarded to the VP level and above. LTIP is intended to motivate employees to make significant contributions to the success of the company and provide competitive compensation to attract and retain talent. Because the stock generally vests over 3 years, employees have incentive to stay with the company. Black Hills proposed a 50% recovery of the company direct and allocated equity compensation expenses in this proceeding, which it contends is consistent with previous commission decisions. UCA agrees with that. Staff recommends denying all LTIP expenses, citing decision number C16-1140 in the company's 2016 rate case, in which the commission concluded that recovery of these costs was not reasonable and authorized the elimination of all expenses associated with the LTIP. Staff further argues that LTIP excluded from other Black Hills affiliates and that Colorado ratepayers should not have to pay these expenses if another jurisdiction does not. In rebuttal, the company maintains LTIP is key to attracting and maintaining employees in a competitive market. And they did note that it is the practice to remove 50% of those costs. So for the AIP, the decision is, should the Commission allow 15% as proposed, and should it accept staff's argument that the 50,000 should be reduced? We would recommend that the Commission authorize those costs, and that you do not that you reject staff's adjustment in both the AIP and in the LTIP. I mean, excuse me, the STIP.
That makes sense to me. Commissioner Gilman?
Yeah, and just to clarify, Ms. Friedman, your recommendation is that we authorize the recovery of those two incentives up to the 15% on an employee basis.
Yes, and that's what the company has proposed.
Okay, yeah, I agree. Thanks.
Commissioner Plant?
I agree.
Okay. And then for the LTIP, because staff is requesting the rejection of everything, we actually do recommend that the Commission deny recovery of any LTIP expenses consistent with your previous decisions. We believe that considering affordability issues raised in this proceeding, it's appropriate that the company and its shareholders bear some of the expenses without burdening ratepayers.
Makes sense to me. Commissioner Gilman?
I also agree.
Commissioner Plant?
I agree.
So, moving to vacant positions, staff recommends removing $1.5 million from the cost of service for 15 vacant positions at the end of 2023. Staff notes the company had 41 open positions in 2022, with an average of 26 open positions since 2015. UCA argues for reducing the cost of service by about $1 million to account for vacancies, also citing the 26 annual open positions since 2015. UCA contends that the company does not incur any labor expenses while a position remains open, so an adjustment for vacancies is necessary. UCA estimates that the average analyzed payroll impact to the company's operations and maintenance budget would be about $2 million, and recommends recovery of 50% of this annual impact, resulting in a reduction of $1 million from the revenue requirement. Black Hills responds that it's incorrect to assume that open positions will remain unfilled for the entire year. The company applied a vacancy lag calculation to these open positions to more accurately assess how many days a given position goes unfilled, and determines that the value of wages should be removed from the revenue requirement. So applying that vacancy lag results in a reduction in the revenue requirement of about $183,000. So the question for the Commission is, should the vacancy expenses be taken out of the cost of service as recommended by staff and UCA?
I'm going to propose something in the middle. I think the vacancy lag approach based on data is the right way to calculate the adjustment. I think that the 15 vacant positions in 2023 is 70 to 75% below the long-term average of 26. As staff said, for example, there were 41 vacancies in 2022. So I just gross up the 183 proposed by Black Hills by 70 to 75%, so it reflects the long-term average number of vacancies, and put in place a $315,000 adjustment. Again, if you need some time to look at that, that'd be understandable, but that's what I'd propose.
Yeah, Ms. Friedman, the value put forward by Black Hills of $183,000, was that based solely on the 2023 value?
Yeah, that's on the historic test year,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would agree that doesn't look to be representative of what has been typical. But at the same time, these are, as I understand them, year-end values, which are of somewhat limited value. So I think the calculation method was the right way to go, as you indicated, but I agree with your premise that it looks as though we're taking somewhat of an artificially low calculation in that. So you would just take whatever they did by the calculation and increase it based on the difference between more or less 15 in 2023 and what looks to be the average over the last, 8 years, which is more like 26.
Yeah, correct. I just divide 26 by 15 and multiply it by the 183, which works out to 315.
I think it'd be fine to confirm this next week, but I'm generally pretty agreeable to your approach.
Yeah, support that as well.
Right, so we will take that up again next week.
If necessary.
If necessary. Well, we'll need a vote on it. So.
All right. then it's necessary.
I know. So an additional compensation issues, the severance pay, Black Hills asserts that severance expenses are prudently incurred in the normal course of business and have been allowed in the cost of service in several cases, and accordingly includes some $305,000 per book severance expenses in its HTY. The company then uses a 3-year average of these payments in the cost of service. This results in a downward adjustment of to $109,000. Staff recommends the Commission deny severance payments from the cost of service. Staff argues Black Hills should be responsible for the payment of severance because it is necessary for management to be accountable for the decisions related to hiring and firing. This results in a reduction in the HTY costs of service by about $305,000. Staff further argues the company is making severance payments that are substantial and in certain circumstances exceeding the final annual salary. This has implications for other employee costs which the company should be responsible for. In rebuttal, Black Hills rejects staff's recommendation to deny all severance expenses. The company argues severance pay is prudently incurred, and these have been included in prior proceedings as the normal course of business. However, in rebuttal, the company adjusted the severance expense to reflect a 5-year average rather than the 3-year average proposed in its direct filing. So this reduces the severance expense to about $90,000. So your question is, should you allow the severance expense to be included in the cost of service? I can make a recommendation.
Please.
Advisors recommend allowing severance expense of $89,899 in the cost of service. Although we are concerned with the expenses borne by ratepayers, we agree these expenses have historically been included in the normal cost of service.
Commissioner Gelman.
I have a little more trouble with this one. Well, first of all, I think it's a little alarming that the 3-year average is so different than the 5-year average. I mean, it moved from 300,000 to 90,000, so not quite sure what's going on with severance to make the average change so dramatically. But, you know, this seems to me to be something entirely within the company's control. They're responsible, as staff pointed out, for all of the hiring and firing, and then essentially reduce their operating personnel expenses if someone is let go. So, you know, I struggle to understand the theory behind ratepayers being responsible for this as a cost, but happy to hear from you all and have you all consider this over the next week.
So your proposal is to deny that expense recovery?
Correct.
I think I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I agree with denial of the severance costs. I think that's on the company.
All right, that's a vote.
That's a vote of 3. All right. Okay. So the next issue is pension and medical expense. While Black Hills Pension Plan was closed to new participants on January 1st of 2010, some active participants who were eligible before the cutoff date continue to accrue benefits, which is an ongoing financial obligation. In the same way, the company's retiree health care plan incurs some ongoing financial obligations. Black Hills requests recovery of the pro forma 2024 accrual amounts being recorded for net periodic pension expense and net periodic retiree health care expense, and the addition of the pension and retiree health care regulatory assets and liability in the rate-based calculation, as well as the associated balance sheet tax impacts consistent with previous Commission decisions. Black Hills requests the inclusion of $374,000 in pension-related costs, $352,000 in retiree health care-related costs, and $680,000 in the cost of service to represent the net after-tax balance sheet assets and liabilities for both pension and retiree health care. Staff recommends inclusion of the 2024 pension and retirement medical expenses in rate base and implementing a tracker mechanism with true-up to prevent over or under recovery. Staff contends this will help both the company and ratepayers in projecting these types of costs and dealing with volatility year to year. Staff also expresses concern about the actuarial study used to determine the expense, as it appears there's been an over-recovery since the last rate case. Staff notes the company agreed with this proposal in proceeding 19 AL 0075G. So the decision before the Commission is, should the costs related to 2024 pension and retirement medical expenses be included in rate base? And advisors recommend the Commission authorize this recovery and that it also authorize a tracking mechanism with no associated return be used to true up the expenses to prevent over or under recovery and help both the company and ratepayers in dealing with volatility year to year.
Commissioner Gilman?
Yeah, I'm fine with authorizing recovery related to those expenses and the tracking mechanism.
Commissioner Plant?
I agree.
As do I.
So turning now to the Aquila pension and retiree medical expense. In 2008, Black Hills acquired Aquila, which had an underfunded pension and retiree medical plan. Staff argues that for 17 years, Black Hills has been collecting some $573,000 each year for the pension and medical expense, even though the Commission never authorized amortization expenses or established a regulatory asset. When staff raised this issue in the 2016 case, the Commission found that the pension expense had been included in prior rate cases and allowed amortization of the expense to remain in the cost of service. However, the Commission also found that the record was unclear and directed Black Hills to include more detail in its direct case in the next Phase 2 rate case. Staff contends the company has not provided more information in this case, only indicating that the cost had been fully amortized prior to the HTY ending December 31st, 2020. Staff also argues that the costs have not been removed from rate base and requests the Commission require Black Hills to reimburse ratepayers some $13.5 million amortized over 3 years. Black Hills responds that the Commission approved the recovery of the amortizations in the 2016 rate case. The company explains that it did not include detail as to the costs in this proceeding because there is no amortization of Aquila-related costs in the revenue requirement in this proceeding. Black Hills also explains that it provided detailed information about Aquila and the source gas pension and retiree medical regulatory assets in the 2017 Rocky Mountain Natural Gas rate case. Black Hills characterizes staff's recommendation that it refund money as retroactive rate making. The Commission's decision here is, should the Commission require reimbursement $13.5 million to ratepayers for the Aquila pension and retiree medical assets. I can offer a recommendation, or if you'd like to have a discussion.
You okay with the recommendation?
Yeah.
Advisors recommend denying staff's request on this issue because it has been addressed in the Black Hills 2016 rate case and the 2017 Rocky Mountain natural gas rate case. The Commission has previously found the record to be unclear, and it has not become more clear in this case. Black Hills has testified that it has amortized the costs and provided the required information in the rate review that followed the 2016 rate case. There's no record in this proceeding to support staff's contention nor to counter Black Hills' argument that requiring reimbursement is not retroactive rate making.
Commissioner Gilman?
I agree.
Commissioner Plant?
I agree, but I have to say I'm a little troubled by this. Just because I
didn't like it either. I was choking on it.
It seems to me that the pension fund should be doing pretty well. And we, the previous commission made a determination that that's sort of where I come into I have a problem with going back and refunding all this money because there was a decision made, and now it seems as though there's just a lack of support to address the questions that the last commission had because they just didn't address it. And some of this, the issue with underfunding during the purchase, the retirement when they purchased Aquila, kind of on the investors. That seems like it's a company issue. That's not really a ratepayer issue. But we're kind of constrained because there's been a determination by a previous commission that that was okay. So, you know, I can agree with the recommendation, but I'm really troubled by the entire thing.
I couldn't agree more. I just didn't have an idea how to really fix it that made sense. So I forget my language very reluctantly defer. So I guess it's a vote, but maybe we'll take it up again next week. How much is it, like on a dollar revenue requirement basis, this issue?
Staff's proposing $13.5 million, amortized over 3 years.
So that's a $4 million a year issue. Yeah, why don't we bring this one back? I'd also be curious to see where the revenue requirement lands as a result of these discussions, where I've lost track of where we're at on what increase we're agreeing to. So maybe over the week you could help us understand where we're at, given the uncertainties that we still have. And I know we have one more issue.
Right, we've got one more. And just to that point, we are planning to have a technical conference after all your decisions to make sure we know where we're at.
I understand.
So we've got
it was
one.
4.5 million a year, please.
So there's one more issue on our phase one issues, trackers. In addition to rate case expense tracker that Mr. Davis talked about, Black Hills proposes 6 new deferred accounting trackers. So the first one is for property tax expense. Black Hills contends this tracker is necessary to prevent under or over recovery because these costs are volatile. They support local communities, are outside of control of management and obligations, and that the obligations must be made. The company notes that the Commission has approved the property tax tracker in recent proceedings for both gas and electric utilities. The company proposes the creation of a new regulatory asset to defer and track insurance expenses above the amount included in base rates. The company argues that since the last rate case in 2016, insurance rates have become unpredictable, especially in the last year. The company proposes a carrying cost on that tracker at the company's authorized WACC. Third is a regulatory asset to defer and track Commission administrative fees above the amount included in base rates. Fourth, Black Hills requests authorization to defer and track fees for greenhouse gas emissions as required by HB 21-1266 and the Colorado Environmental Justice. Black Hills argues that a tracker is necessary because these fees are outside of the control of management. They are imposed by a governmental entity. As with other trackers, the company proposes a carrying cost at its authorized WACC. Fifth tracker relates to vegetation management expenses. Although Black Hills and staff reached an agreement on vegetation management expenses in the cost of service, Black Hills requests deferral and tracking vegetation management expenses, since these costs are largely driven by an increased third-party vendor contracts. In explanation, the company has 4-year maintenance cycle for distribution circuits, 5-year cycle for transmission circuits, and that's essentially the time between trimming activities. The company says it's current on its 5-year cycle, but not on its 4-year cycle, because cycle lengths are established based on assumptions that might not align with actual vegetation growth. So in order to defer and track third-party vendor expenses associated with out-of-cycle vegetation management, the company proposes a tracker with a 3-year deferral period. And finally, with its proposed shift from inclining block rates to a flat energy charge, which the commissions will discuss later, on the optional TOU rates, Black Hills proposes a customer communication and education plan and requests a tracker for expenses associated with the activities planned for that. Black Hills argues that a tracker is appropriate here because the plan will not be implemented until 2025, so those costs will not be included in this cost of service. UCA recommends the Commission reject all regulatory assets and trackers because none meet the unexpected or extraordinary expense requirement generally found to support regulatory assets. However, should the Commission approve any of the proposed trackers, UCA recommends the Commission reject any return on the balances. UCA argues use of regulatory assets reduces the risk to Black Hills, therefore the Commission should also consider a downward revision to the ROE. Staff recommends the Commission authorize the creation of regulatory assets for property tax expense and PUC fees with no return. Staff recommends rejection of the rest of the proposed regulatory assets because Black Hills has not provided persuasive arguments for the extraordinary recovery of these costs. The company replies in rebuttal that it's only proposing to track the incremental above or below baseline amounts, not the total cost, and that the UCA is incorrect regarding risk. The company argues that because these expenses remain subject to prudence review in the next rate case, they are not risk-free. So here the Commission's decision is, should the Commission establish trackers for property taxes, insurance expenses, PUC administrative fees, greenhouse gas emissions, vegetation management, customer education plan. And advisors recommend the Commission authorize trackers only for property tax expense and the PUC administrative fees, with no associated return. We recommend denying all other proposed trackers.
Makes sense to me. Commissioner Gilman?
I also agree.
Commissioner Plant?
I agree.
All right.
That's phase one. It's 11:20.
Mr. Davis, what's our path forward here?
I recommend that we take up all the remaining issues at the next weekly meeting and vacate the room.
I'm good with that. And you guys will help us understand where we're at on revenue requirement and all that. If so, that'd be really helpful.
Yes, and we do plan to present a recommendation to schedule a technical conference at next week's weekly meeting, and we will address who will hear that technical conference and when it will be. We've been working with the judges on that in case it's referred to a judge, but that I'm just giving everyone notice that we will be talking technical conference next week as well.
All right. And before we adjourn, I just want to thank you guys for helping us through a really complicated case in a professional, really helpful manner. Just really appreciate it. So thank you, and thanks to the parties. Anything else before we adjourn?
Nothing additional. Thanks.
I'm good. Thanks.
All right. We're adjourned. Thank you.